there's a way to adorn the truth without sugarcoating it and without watering it down. And that obviously is our goal, right? Our goal is to present the truth in such a way that the truth is not compromised, but we increase the chances of whoever we're speaking to accepting it, right? And that's kind of the goal, and that's where rhetoric comes in. It's not about compromising the truth, it's about presenting the truth in such a way that others find it compelling and convincing. But like I said, out of the gate, we're going to be looking at the elements of rhetoric. And there's not going to be a whole lot of assignments in this class. I'm mostly just looking for, you know, class participation. And then at the end, we are going to have a little bit not a little bit, a final, and then also kind of a practical side of that, where I'm just going to pitch you some scenarios and see how you respond based on what we've covered in the class. Okay. Um, let's see here. Let me go back to sharing the screen. All right, so let's get into oh yeah, so this quote here is from the book I just showed you, The Elements of Rhetoric. He says, "As classically conceived, the chief aim of rhetoric is to arm the good against the assaults of the bad. Truth, of course, retains a native appeal. That is, truth is kind of inherently appealing to everybody. Yet truth unadorned is usually truth ignored." So let's kind of break this apart. So the first sentence there, classically conceived, that is kind of going back to some of these guys that we've quoted. The goal is to arm the good against the assaults of the bad. And that is, there is a right and a wrong. There is a moral and an immoral. There is a truth and a falsehood. And you want to arm those who know the truth and are sharing the truth and know the good and are sharing the good. You want them to have the strategies and the abilities to be persuasive to the masses, right? Because, and I think we see this in our culture today, you could have falsehood and immorality in the right packaging, and more people will accept that, right? If you package it the right way, if you share it the right way. And of course, we see that all over the place. That second sentence there, truth, of course, retains a native appeal. What do you think he means by that?
I think the idea is that everybody, it's just our conscious self that wants to know what is right, wants to know what is true. There's something in us that is calling out for truth, whatever that truth we might think it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I would say, and I think we could all agree on this, generally speaking, people want to believe what is true, right? And they might think that what is false is true, but they're not, most of the time, they're not saying, well, I'm actively seeking lies to believe is true. Most of the time, right? Truth has a native appeal. But what do you think about this last sentence? Yet truth unadorned is usually truth ignored.
That's an unfortunate truth that we have to deal with. If it doesn't have a pretty topping on it, it generally gets ignored. Sometimes the truth is not that pretty, so that's why it's
Yeah,
not accepted.
right, right. Yeah, exactly. And I think too, the idea of you can tell people, and we're going to get into this a little bit when we start breaking down the main tools of rhetoric, but you could tell people something that's true, almost just like a calculator can tell you 2 plus 2 equals 4, but it might not be convincing to them, right? And there's a whole host of reasons why it might not be convincing to them. It might not be emotionally appealing. It might not make them feel good. They might not trust you, right? So you could be saying something that's perfectly true, but hey, I just met you, dude. I don't know who you are. I don't know if you're telling the truth, right? So all those things kind of work together. And I think when he's talking about truth unadorned, there's a way to adorn the truth without sugarcoating it and without watering it down. And that obviously is our goal, right? Our goal is to present the truth in such a way that the truth is not compromised, but we increase the chances of whoever we're speaking to accepting it, right? And that's kind of the goal, and that's where rhetoric comes in. It's not about compromising the truth, it's about presenting the truth in such a way that others find it compelling and convincing. Um, and this is why, in debate, it's not necessarily the person with the truth is going to win the debate. And that is the weakness of debate. And I open this up. Why is it the case sometimes that it's not necessarily the case that the person with the truth will win the debate?
Because they just haven't presented it as well as the other
Yeah,
their side of
exactly.
it.
Yeah, and it might be something as simple as delivery, right? Where the guy with the truth, for whatever reason, he's nervous or whatever and doesn't seem confident. And people in the audience are thinking, wow, this guy's not as confident as the other guy. Maybe what he's saying isn't true. And we might say, well, that shouldn't matter. Okay, I agree with you. But the truth is that it does. And people who are kind of in the middle, little things like that can kind of pull them one way or the other, right? I'm not saying debate is bad. I'm just saying one of the weaknesses is people are not calculators, right? The input is not always the output. You could tell them things that are true until you're blue in the face, but they might not be convinced by it. And I think we've all had experiences with that. So that's kind of where we're going with the goal of these rhetorical principles and these practices is, not changing the truth, but maybe changing some of the things we do in our presentation of it. And I don't even say changing the way we present it. I would just say adding some tools to our toolbox is the way I would look at it. All right. Moving on to the rhetorical triangle. Anybody ever heard of this? Anybody know what these are? These three sides?
The logos, the ethos, and the other things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Depending on who your Greek teacher was, how you want to pronounce it, logos, pathos, and ethos. These three are the three sides of the rhetorical triangle: logos, pathos, ethos. They're the three means open to you to influence your listener. And these three things, this idea, is ancient. Aristotle's kind of the one that made it popular. Even sometimes this would be called Aristotle's triangle. But it's this idea that, and all these kind of have a relation to each other. That's why they're kind of viewed as a triangle. But it's kind of the idea that these three things, which we're going to look at in depth today, are our most fundamental tools in our toolbox for trying to persuade others. And the goal is to have them, not just to have them all, but to have them all in the right proportion. And we're going to look at what that looks like. So here's the triangle kind of illustrated, if you will. You've got ethos up there at the top, and that is ethics or credibility. Obviously, that's kind of the root of our English for ethics, but it refers really to credibility. And it's the trustworthiness or the authority of the speaker, and it is connected to tone or style. And that is really just this idea of, and this is the hardest one to have because this is the hardest one to use in a lot of ways because your whole life develops your ethos. Especially as a minister, right? I think all of us either are or want to be or are engaged in ministry. As a preacher, if you don't practice what you preach, you're a lot easier to ignore, right? So that goes back to credibility, that goes back to trustworthiness. Okay, logos down there at the bottom, that's logic or reason. Obviously, we know that. And in Greek philosophy, the logos of the universe was kind of the organizing principle or kind of the backbone, if you will, of reality. This idea that there are ideas that are true, there are ideas that are false, and there's a way to know the difference, right? Obviously, a lot of our English words comes from this logic, but also, the study of things, biology, theology, all that idea of studying things and getting to know them. And in speeches, generically, this is facts, statistics, case studies, scientific evidence. I would say in our goals, these are things like logical arguments. These are things like making sure our arguments are sound and valid, avoiding fallacies, things like that. And we'll get into that in more detail today. And then you have pathos, and that's the emotional impact and the personal connection. And again, this is something that if we want to be persuasive, we don't always, some people will be persuaded even if we don't do this that well, which is great. But to maximize our persuasiveness, to have these present in our presentations and our speeches, I would say even in our sermons. So emotional impact, you could get up there and you could just read a script, like a robot or something. And if there's somebody who doesn't already agree with you, they're not likely to find you persuasive, right? Because they weren't emotionally engaged. And you can overuse pathos, obviously, and we're gonna talk about that. You can be too emotional, and then that ruins your credibility. So it's about balance and finding the right proportions. Here's another version of this. It just goes in a little bit more detail. I know that's hard to see. But we're going to do it in a different order. The order we're going to be looking at it. You've got logos there at the bottom. This is the message. Facts, research, other message elements that provide proof or evidence to a claim. You can use logos to convince your audience that what they are hearing or seeing is well researched, well built, or otherwise worth their time. And I think we tend to emphasize this one. I don't think that's bad. Obviously Christianity is a logical religion. It's a taught religion. But when it comes to persuading, again, people aren't just brains. They also have a heart. They also have a life. They also have, all these other facets to themselves. So logos is just a piece of the puzzle. And then you've got pathos there. And if you look up rhetorical triangles, a lot of people will say this is kind of the audience side of things. And it goes, of course, to that idea of emotion. You've probably heard terms like pathological, pathology, stuff like that. But it usually refers to how an audience is made to feel or how they experience a message. And you can appeal to pathos to make a person feel excited, sad, angry, motivated, jealous, or any other number of emotions that may persuade them to act based on what you say. Okay. Obviously, we don't want to manipulate people. But there should be an emotional connection proportionate to our subject matter. And that's something we're going to talk about. And then, of course, you got ethos up there at the top. This is something that the speaker has to do with the speaker, the credibility of the person. It's established through a variety of factors, including status, awareness, professionalism, celebrity endorsement, which I think for us as preachers probably is not going to happen. If we had a celebrity endorsement, that'll probably make us less credible, right? Depending on the celebrity, I guess, and so forth. And you build ethos to make your audience trust what you're saying, right? So, a big part of that, a lot of the things that we do as preachers, we usually don't frame it in this language, but we do it in order to establish ethos. I would say, for example, the way we dress is an attempt to establish ethos, right? And it's not necessarily a bad thing if you go to a church service and the preacher is dressed better than the other people or, on par with the best that are dressed in the assembly, because even if we want to say it shouldn't be this way, that does give an air of credibility, right? If you're the one in the suit and the tie.
Yeah, well,
Yeah, go
I'm
ahead.
sorry to interrupt, but it gives credibility to the importance of the message. Subconsciously, even when people don't think that that's true, if you walked into an area and saw somebody that was delivering God's word, and our way to salvation in a t-shirt and a pair of cutoffs, credibility is gone. Even if they think, even some people are like, it doesn't matter what you wear, it matters where your heart is. That's not going to be true. People are not going to accept the solemnness of his message if he's dressed that way. It's just not gonna happen.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think sometimes we conflate, do you have to dress this way to be pleasing to God with, do you have to dress this way to be more effective, And I think your point's spot on. I think we see this even in kind of like the quote unquote secular world. For example, I don't know if you guys are familiar. I'm sure many of you are with Jordan Peterson.
Yes,
He wears a suit everywhere he goes.
yes.
And every time you see him, like in a podcast or at a speaking event or whatever, he's in a suit. So he's trying to communicate something, and I think we kind of subconsciously, everybody kind of subconsciously understands, okay, we have to listen to what he says. Now, you could be in a suit and say nonsense, and it's not going to convince anybody, right? But the
Right.
suit that's a building piece. That's a tool in your toolbox to say, okay, I'm dressing in a credible way. And that might vary from culture to culture, credible dress in, Ghana, West Africa might be different from credible dress in the United States of America. But that idea of I'm going to use everything I can in my toolbox so that I don't, that I can eliminate all barriers to people listening to me, right? And now our brothers and sisters in Christ, because they understand the truth of the gospel, they're probably going to listen to us no matter what. But if we have visitors or we have individuals who are unsure about the gospel, are really trying to hear us out, small things like that could make a big difference. Um, so yeah, so that is the rhetorical triangle. Know these three. We're going to look at these in more detail with some of the rest of the time we have today. But know these three, know the triangle. That will for sure come back later on a test. So just be very familiar with these three things and what they represent.
These are consequently exactly what I used to teach my sales guys when I was a sales manager.
Oh, really?
If you don't gain their trust, the other two are useless.
Yeah.
But even if you have their trust, um, if there's no logic in your message, they all three have to be equal in sales for you to close a sale.
Yeah. No, that's great. That's great insight. And in any kind of persuasive speaking, these apply, because and like you said, it is a balance or a dance even. And that's why it's a triangle. If you take one side away from a triangle, it's no longer a triangle. It's two lines. So all three of these work together, absolutely. All right, any questions or comments before we move on?
Yes, sir.
All right, let's go to logos, depending on how you learned that, but not Legos. It's not Legos. So logos, reasoning. Logos means, quite simply, from our book here, intelligent speech. And this guy in the book says reasonable speech begins with right grammar. And it doesn't mean you have to be, what do we call them, a grammar Nazi or the grammar police or anything like that. But logos goes back to the idea that our primary objective is to be understood, right? Our primary objective is to impart something to the people we're speaking with. And that obviously we're going to have to be reasonable. We're going to have to use intelligible and intelligent speech. And we're going to have to, as much as we can, use language in a correct way. And I think a lot of people, most people we speak to, period, generally speaking, aren't going to know the rules of grammar, aren't going to know the rules of the English language, but their ear will be able to pick up when we say something that's not right. And they might not even know what rule we're breaking, but they'll be like, that doesn't sound right, right? So especially if we're talking with somebody who is hostile to the faith or is anti-Christianity, we have to make sure that as much as we can, we have all of our ducks in a row.